Welcome, everybody, to LinkedIn Live. The Crestwood crew is here. Are you guys excited for today?
Absolutely.
Perfect. All right. Well, welcome to the audience. Once you all start to log in here, I think the feed will catch up. But I'm Stephanie McColly, the Chief Marketing Officer at Crestwood Associates. Crestwood is a 15-year Acumatica Gold partner. I like to call us a veteran in the space, and we've implemented Acumatica for hundreds of businesses across the U.S. In addition to that, we're actually a Microsoft partner, and we've been in the ERP space for over 26 years. And so we specialize with implementations from like Dynamics SL and GP, and specifically in the manufacturing, distribution, construction, kind of professional services area. So why we're live today is we want to discuss the changes of the new rollout of the modern UI with Acumatica's new user interface, or modern user interface, and the impact that you can expect for your business, or also some secret tips that maybe our experts here on the team are going to have to offer. So let me introduce our team here. We have Robert Sternberg. Say hi, Robert. Our Acumatica Services Director and Acumatica MVP. Robert actually serves on the Acumatica Manufacturing Board, and he and his team are on the forefront of implementing Acumatica for our clients and then helping them gain maximum return of investment as their businesses grow. Also supporting the discussion, we have our in-house team of developers. We've got Mike Gifford and Joe Jacob and Evan Templin. Say hi, guys.
Hello.
Mike and Joe are Acumatica developer MVPs. That's the old school MVP, just saying they've been around for a long time. I think Acumatica's renamed the program, but we're going to go with that. And they oversee our in-house development efforts. While Joe is managing the day-to-day team and the projects, you're going to find Mike leading up our Acumatica add-ons side of the business. These are native Acumatica solutions that we build specifically at Crestwood based on the feedback that we hear from our clients and just from the community about solutions that maybe could help Acumatica amplify the ERP experience. You can find all of those, by the way, on the Acumatica Marketplace. Now, last but not least is Evan Templin. Evan brings a fresh load of ideas to us because his user experience with Acumatica actually started on the client side, and he's brought that to us behind the scenes at Crestwood as we serve our clients. So this entire team has been working side by side, partnering with Acumatica to provide development insights and feedback with the development of the new modern UI. And so whether you're an end user, an Acumatica VAR, you're considering Acumatica as your future solution, or you're just generally curious about what we're going to talk about today with this new user interface, my goal is to interview this team and gain the most important insights that the Acumatica community needs to feel well equipped for these new UI changes. Sometimes when changes happen, it can be a little bit scary. So our goal is to ease those maybe concerns for you. As we're chatting, if you've got questions, throw them into the chat. We're happy to answer those. And to get started, we're going to do a really fun roundup here. So this is going to be a first question for the entire team. This is Acumatica's second UI lift. And so what I want to know from you guys is what excites you about these modern UI changes. And so Giff, why don't I, and by the way, Mike Gifford is Giff on this call, everybody. So if you hear us referring to him as Giff, it's going to happen all day. Just know that's Mike. So Giff, why don't you get us started? What's the most exciting part about some of these modern UI changes?
Sure, thanks, Steph. So, from the developer perspective, I'll chime in on a few things I think are pretty cool and pretty exciting. It's almost like coming downstairs as a kid at Christmas. We got all these cool things that have been a long time coming, and we just can't wait to put them to use and put them in people's environments. And what it amounts to for us, especially on the development side, is we've got a new set of tools. It opens the door to a lot of new creativity, both on the ISV product side as well as our customer-facing interactions with customizations that we do. So a lot of new opportunity there, a lot of creativity, and I think that's the thing. We've been kind of using the same tools for so long now. We're really excited to use something different and something new. So that's pretty cool. And then there's a lot of new features that are just kind of coming along for the ride. If you read the new UI features overview that comes with the 25R2 release, there's just a handful of new things that are out there. Some are in the experimental features phase still, but there's still a lot of excitement around some of the new tools. So we're just excited to have all the new options and tools. At least I am.
Yeah, I am too. I'm excited to talk about it. That's what we're going to do. Robert, how about you? What are you most excited about?
Yeah, Giff actually mentioned the word creativity. That's one thing that I love about Acumatica. It allows us to be creative. It has for a long time. And at Crestwood, as we work through projects, we're not just focused on the technical functions of what each button, switch it, and dial does in Acumatica, but we really learn about the businesses and how they operate. and we mix best practices with secret sauce of your organization. So this new set of tools allows us to really supercharge that element and give some tailored workflows specific to users, because it's interesting. Users interact with Acumatica in different ways. The accounting team is going to view a sales order much differently than operations. So from the user perspective, it's all about productivity for me.
Yeah, that's good and super insightful. Different team members are going to think about this differently. So we're going to address all of those. Jill, how about you? What are you most excited about?
Yeah, it's ironic because I was going to say exactly all those things that Robert and Mike just said.
Yeah.
But for me, it's features, features, features. We, believe it or not, developers really love this kind of change because it gets us into a realm where we can really be creative, like Robert said, and to start leveraging things that we couldn't leverage before. And now that's possible, and Acumatica's done an incredible job at laying that groundwork for us to get started. So that's what I'm excited about.
I love hearing that too, because a lot of times you often hear creativity and you think of marketing or some other part of the business. And I love the fact that creativity truly is our development team, and that's exciting. So Evan, how about you? What are the exciting changes you want to see?
Yeah, I mean, from a developer perspective, using more modern technologies is always nice. Moving forward in the world is always, something nice and refreshing. But outside of that, just being able to, have the ability to build more custom designed screens for our customers, so that way they can have that truly best experience, is nice. Because, like, for me, like, one of my favorite things is when I deliver something to a client and they say, yes, that's perfect, that's going to fit my need. Like, that feeling is so good. So knowing that we can do that even better now is, exciting in itself.
That's so true. And I've worked with so many owners in the past where we've built out dashboards and just different types of system solutions. And the layout, it comes down to user access, user usability, I guess. Some of these things that once you get into a mode and you know your processes as a company, these things really allow you just to get into a rhythm as a team. And they're so important visually for business owners and just business users. So a lot of this is going to be fun to talk about today. So Robert, for our audience who might be new to this, maybe they're not up to date on the modern UI and what's happening. What's a high level overview of the key UI updates coming to Acumatica that you can provide for us?
So Acumatica is giving an entirely new interface to work with that's going to feel very familiar. And that might seem like two opposite ends of the spectrum, but Acumatica is taking their current interface and moving it to a modern architecture. You're going to have compartmentalized areas that allow you to focus on individual elements, whether it's the summary of a document, totals, or line level details. And in that, it's making some architecture changes behind the scenes that, as developer, I couldn't speak to, but we have an amazing team to talk about that today. From the user perspective, what it means to me is that we've all pulled out our phone, we've all checked an order, we've all run a report, and that feels so much more seamless from the user perspective. There's a lot of design changes that are responsive, which means whether I'm pulling this up on a laptop, an iPad, a phone, things start to feel like it's meant for that interface, makes it quicker to use. There's also a lot of behind the scene changes that are going to support AI, chatbots, interactive reports, and dashboards. So I'm excited to see that. And then maybe I'll close out with one comment. In a room full of developers right now, I can say that the new UI allows us to do much more no-code, low-code adjustments as well, which means, as I mentioned about before, this is the exciting piece. We get to be creative. We get to interact with the screens in new ways where the fields that are important to you surface to the top of the screen. So as a high level, you're going to see a much more modern interaction style in Acumatica. You can work in your workspace categories and screens much more fluidly.
Yeah, that's great. I love the low code, no code reference because it's been a hot topic out in the market for a really long time. But also, I think with that comes vibe coding. Isn't that right, guys? Is that like a whole thing with it? No? All right.
I don't know.
Well, that's
Well,
a
the cool
whole
part
nother
about that,
topic.
though, what Robert was saying is the low code, no code is, you'd think that'd be a little counter productive for us developers out there, right? But the irony of all that is we actually get to work on and focus more on the cool stuff. We can, adding a field to a screen is not terribly exciting at this point for us. So, we would love to work on the more complicated pieces and, take advantage of that new architecture, like Robert mentioned, the single page application aspect of it, to where, the screens are so much more rich and so much more responsive without having to do page loads and different things that they used to have to do to support the ASPX architecture. There's just a lot of new plumbing under the hood that really allows us to take advantage of, the responsiveness, the adaptiveness, personalization, colorization, all these things that you're going to see in the documentation that's coming around. And it's not really the first time they've pulled this off either. You mentioned earlier that the prior new UI, so the good part of this is we've been able to kind of keep the product moving forward from a technical perspective and not really disrupt it. Other products out there simply can't do that. So that's been exciting for me as a developer to see that.
Yeah, and from a high level user level, not from the ground or the details of customizations, but there's a screen configurator now that already exists in Acumatica, but it's been augmented greatly to where it's not just being able to change the order on a grid. You can now change how the form view looks, and you can rearrange that just for yourself without going into a customization. Low code, no code. I don't know if they consider that still low code. It's more of a configuration sort of level that wasn't possible before, but it is now. And so you can even share your own configurations with, maybe you're working in accounts payable and you have other people that enter invoices. Maybe you kind of come up with a perfect workflow where you're hiding certain things on the screen so that you can better get the invoices in quicker. You can share those configurations with people, or you can decide as an entire team to roll those out for the entire company.
Yeah, I really like that because, for instance, with like on the marketing side, I'll give an example, and we've got these on the accounting side too internally, but it's really common that I'm looking for certain bits of information that are available in certain areas, and the team can benefit from those, but they also need a little more detail than maybe what I'm looking at. So to be able to turn things on, turn things off, and share data, right, in a way visually is kind of nice. And then you're all talking about the same data, the same points of reference, and it just helps with streamlined communication. So Joe, we work with Acumatica really closely. The whole partner network, of course, is great with Acumatica, and they're super supportive. One of the things they did is they helped us get up to speed with all of these changes, and they specifically worked with you and the development team. So can you help me, or can you help us, the audience, understand what was it that you guys had to get trained on as a development team? And were there any maybe fun or challenging moments during that process that our viewers might relate to?
Yeah, it's a great question because Acumatica really was very intentional about rolling this out. As we know, this has been in the works for probably several years, but what they decided to do is come up with a training pilot program that they invited certain partners to, certain developers. And I believe it was a 4, maybe 6-week program. It was laid out very well. It was back in May. I think it was in May. And the content was beautiful. It was detailed. It was even in some areas AI driven, where you could ask, you had a prompt that you could ask questions. And then some of the tests that you would have to take, you would have to sort of hand write out some code. And so the AI could look at that and see if you're, like in the neighborhood of getting it correct, and it was able to grade you that way. But kudos to Acumatica for really laying that out in a very intentional way. It was really great to see.
Awesome. Yeah, that's good feedback. As we have given this like overarching sort of overview of what's coming, I want to start to get a little more into the details of what everyone's really looking for. And so let's talk about what's new specifically in the Acumatica UI. So Robert, what are the standout features in this modern UI, like the updated side panels or customizable workspaces, I should say? What are some of those things we should be looking for or looking forward to?
Yeah, so I'll start with side panels. It's a great example. Side panels were introduced to Acumatica a few years ago, and they're becoming more common. and they're becoming more adaptable. So you're able to slide them out and have bigger workspaces. We talked about that responsive UI, and I was going smaller, laptop, phone, tablet, but what about larger? We have production facilities that have big TVs on the floor. We have monitors on the desk for looking at reports. So you're able to work simultaneously across your side panels much more fluidly in the new environment. And with the larger screens, you are seeing those clear areas. You're seeing the color coding. So before it was a single gray panel, you're now going to see blue areas that represent the summary information, and purple that's going to be roll up, and a clear background for your line levels. So that's much more natural. And I think that's important because it sounds like this is design, but it's really enhancing usability. And what we find is usability is so tightly correlated to adoption that it's important for your data to be entered in your system. People stop using a system because they become frustrated. Stephanie, you mentioned the accounting team. They're opening sales orders, they're going to financial tabs, they're digging into the GL, and eventually they might feel a little bit discouraged. So along with these concrete features that again might sound like design, people are using the system more, which means we have more intentional data behind the elements as well, which I think is very powerful for how we teach users how to interact inside of the system, and then how they interact and they're excited about it, truthfully.
Yeah, I like to think of it like when you're looking at a website, for instance. So maybe like an end user who might be listening to this, you're looking at a website and you're on the move. So you're switching from your laptop over to your phone, and you need that like similar user experience, but it's got to be more functional on the phone because it's smaller. Or maybe you want to cast it to your TV, and all of a sudden it's this, big visual experience on the TV. You want it to work for that, but not only do you want to view it, it's got to be functional. You've got to be able to interact with it. And so I think what you're saying is, spot on to what users can expect as maybe enhancements of not only seeing their information on different devices, but being able to actually interact with it really sufficiently.
That's right. And it also allows what I'd call intentional AI. There's a lot on the market right now that's bolting on maybe a chat bot to their product and is able to look at the information. What you're hearing from our developer team now is this is not just on the user side, which of course I'm talking about, but it's foundational elements behind the scenes that allow us to really have some focused input on how AI interacts with the system. So this is great for some immediate benefit to our users, but it's also using what Acumatica is great at from a framework perspective to support some of those AI elements rolling out in a very methodical way.
Yeah. Evan, you do a lot of thought processes with us on the marketing side of like, hey, can we lay this out differently? You give a lot of feedback sort of creatively. So I'm kind of interested from you, how does this modern UI incorporate modern design principles, such as those responsive layouts? Are there any like wow moments that you've experienced while testing these things that you think is really going to pay off for end users?
Yeah, I mean, as someone who also happens to use the system, not only as a developer but as an end user for things like time cards, one of the first things I was interested is how can I now enter my time card from my phone if I sometimes we're on the road, sometimes we're forget on a Friday to finish and we're not at our desk anymore, things like that happen. So that was one of the first things, and being able to actually see Acumatica on your phone, because sometimes it works right now and most of the time it doesn't, but actually being able to look at the system and see it in a more responsive manner, I was just exciting in general. But if looking under the hood a little bit, right now Acumatica uses pixel-based areas to determine how big your screen is and what can or can't fit, and then it tries to adjust to fix limited sizing. The new modern UI, allows us to have some dynamicness to it. It allows us to set up what are known as cards and chips and have new components to it that dynamically are able to understand what can or can't fit and in a more column-based configuration, which is not only good from a development side, but also follows modern day practices set out by the Googles and the Metas of the world who make these giant design libraries. So seeing that and that general direction, like I said earlier, just being able to be modern is just huge.
That's great. From a technical perspective, is there anything else like under the hood change-wise, like framework updates that you see are enabling some of these enhancements?
Yeah, for sure. Because right now in the current interface that Acumatica has, everything is ASP.NET or C#.NET based. They are moving that back end core to be .NET Core based. So that way, this new UI now is .NET Core compatible. So that allows them to continue to make those enhancements mentioned by the team already, to make it more feature based, make it more feature rich, and continue to grow and move into each modern space. But on top of that, getting rid of the ASPXs that render on the server side, this now allows for client-side rendering, which allows us to give users more instantaneous feedback, allows them to see things in real time. And it uses now a web services backend and a single page application front end, which allows for quick API updates and things like that. So you're not waiting for entire data loads to go back and forth.
Those are
it also
examples.
adds the client side scripting and coding piece of it to support all that, and really from a debugging and from a kind of user interface standpoint, you can get to the data, you can get to the things that are happening via debuggers in the browser and things like that, which really kind of changes the game in terms of what we could really look at before. Before we were really server side debugging, that's all we could do. Now we can actually get into the client side, at least work with the clients to do that. So that's exciting. It's different. It's new, so we're thrilled about seeing some of that.
Yeah. So Mike, given some of that information, one of the things that we do at Crestwood is, of course, we listen to the client feedback. If there's something that doesn't exist in Acumatica that they could really use, of course, we can make customizations. But we also notice some commonalities where maybe this solution could really complement Acumatica, and so we'll build that add-on as an ongoing solution, that can be used and downloaded from the marketplace. So as we're doing that, we're looking into the end user, what's their experience? What are they looking for? How do we build something that just makes them get more out of their Acumatica system? And so as we kind of take some of these details of what's new in the UI and we think about why does it matter to the end user, we're constantly thinking about that. So what do you feel like are some reasons that like an everyday user should care about these changes?
Well, the key is even in the areas that where you're not seeing new features per se, even the kind of the run-of-the-mill areas of the system, you're seeing improvements just by the sheer nature of going to the modern UI, because they're able to lay the information out differently, because you're able to interact with your report launcher in a different way, more efficiently. There's even I saw an update on the financial reporting side of things, where the financial reporting tools have a much more streamlined way of interacting with the columns, the rows, and all of that stuff. So there's little nuggets everywhere, and I think people will find that overall you're going to see some efficiency gains, regardless of if you look into the new features that are supported as well. But really, the cool big pieces of the puzzle are some of the new features. We had a client request the other day for a new layout that we really wouldn't have been able to support in the old UI. And I happened to see, I think we saw some snips and previews of it at Summit. It was the kind of the e-commerce, product browser sort of presentation, where you see a picture of the product and then some summary descriptions, and it's kind of in a grid that just keeps scrolling and scrolling until you find what you're looking for. And they really needed some of that, and we couldn't have really provided it inside the framework before. And so you're going to get those more creative and more usable solutions using some of those new controls that are released. And the common theme here, you're going to hear it over and over again. It's a modern look and feel, responsive, reactive. All of those things come with it. So we're super excited about that. We've had, like Joe mentioned, we've had kind of a preview here for the last several months in detail, and then prior to that for the last couple of years, kind of in some more theoretical sense. So we're already bringing that to bear for our clients, and in turn, and also in terms of our ISV products. So we're plowing forward, and it's really exciting.
Good. Okay. So Joe, for the developer side of things, how are these updates simplifying customizations or maybe like extension development, or are there any specific tools that are now easier to work with?
Yeah, actually, it's important to note that even though some things are going to get a lot more simple, a lot easier, a lot more intuitive to do, you kind of have to get onto the front end of it and play with it, get to understand it, read some blogs, read some of the information coming out of Acumatica. There's with release 25R2, it's a preview release. There's a PDF out there called, I think it's just Modern UI Notes, or I forget the title of it, but if you read through that, you start getting a sense for what's now possible. I mentioned before about the screen configurator, which is sort of a layer on top of low code, no code. So you're going to have a variety of different ways to make changes. And so as a partner, what we try to do with our clients is we're going to be having some sit downs with them to try to explain to them what's possible. I think there was a famous quote in the movie The Notebook, I think it was, that with great power comes great responsibility. I'm not sure if
that's Spider-Man.
No.
Get out of here. But I do
Anyway,
love that you're watching The Notebook.
Well, by proxy, I didn't do it on purpose. So what was I trying to say? So there are going to be a lot of features there, but you're not going to be able to really take advantage of them unless you know about them. And that's something that we try to do at Crestwood as a perk to being your partner, is to sit down with you and go through all that with you, because every client has a very different perspective about how they're viewing this modern UI. We have some clients that are frankly a little bit scared of it and don't want to necessarily dive into something that works just great for them. And the point we're trying to drive in is that it's not necessarily a dangerous change. Keep in mind that all that business logic, even the customization stuff that we do, that's still there. That's not changing. It's the presentation layer that is changing, and that is opening up some opportunity to us to do some really cool things. So the takeaway is, yeah, you're going to have a lot of simplification coming to you. Even with the low code, no code, I can see some changes already that make that easier. But it's important to know what your options are and to be aware of what you're getting into.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting because I'm often on the forefront side of businesses considering, am I going to move to Acumatica? And what's nice about it is, as we're in that process of helping them determine their next steps, it's often that we see that they really love the current interface. And so the fact that it only gets better is just a great example to know that Acumatica is making these great updates over time consistently, and it's going to continue to be a leader, in these specific spaces. And it also on the back end is helping our implementation teams get better too. So they're not just doing it for the end user, they're doing it across the board. And so, speaking of sort of that front part of the cycle, Robert, it's not uncommon that we're talking to someone, a business specifically, who is considering maybe NetSuite or Sage or Acumatica. And it's always a no-brainer to go with Acumatica. But what are some of the unique advantages if somebody's considering, NetSuite or Sage today? What are some of those unique advantages with this modern UI that you think will really stand out?
Yeah, it's a good question, good thought-provoking question. I think it's the intentionality around how Acumatica fits the mid-market and then allows you to scale very effectively. Acumatica at its core is a product that you can get into and you can benefit from all of these enhancements along the way. Early on in your Acumatica journey, you might have heard that word framework. You've certainly heard us talk about it here. And it goes end to end in Acumatica. It's actually part of how Acumatica was developed and conceived, is with these interchangeable components. So without needing to go through another ERP implementation, without needing to switch products or upgrade to the next best thing, you're getting extreme improvements and enhancements. I remember the days where we were VPNing into our work to get into the ERP system, or RDPing for those of you that were working in that remote desktop environment. And I could think of a whole nother set of alphabet soup that talks about how to get into ERPs that we've frankly forgotten about when we're using Acumatica, because it's as simple as opening up a web browser and you're there. So you're getting all of these changes along the way. And it allows us to really be competitive as a product when you add a product line, when you acquire a business. Acumatica is going to be there to support you. And this new UI is just one element of that scalability plan that takes you from startup to enterprise. It's meant for all of those customers and enabling you through that journey.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was on a client call yesterday. We were discussing the move to Acumatica from a legacy system with one of our clients, and they made the reference that it used to take them at least 8 days to do 8 hours, to do onboarding with their finance team just to get them up to par on their old system. And now it takes about an hour because of the usability of Acumatica. And so they've saved significant time with their onboarding, which has been really great. And I think those real world impacts on like workflows and productivity, those are tangible things that changes like this make. And so Mike, can you share maybe a real world example of how this modern UI could transform a typical workflow, or maybe something with scheduling or inventory management, something that like the audience can really relate to?
Yeah, for sure. And really a lot of this stuff, comes back to these constant themes, controls and layout options that are new and improved, that allow for optimization, that allow for performance increases in terms of the usability, as well as the personalization that goes on top of that. And so when you look at that, those are two overarching themes. But then when you apply those to, for example, the new service calendar board, it's so much richer, so much more interactive. And again, because of the single page architecture, that interaction is much more like a desktop application in terms of the feature richness that you have. And so we're able to do things now inside the browser that really you couldn't have done with the other architecture that we had. So service calendar board, production scheduling, those things that have kind of that calendaring aspect to them are just much I would say simple. They're not easy to do, but they're from a development perspective, but they are much more feature rich and optimized for the end user, which is exciting. Another thing that I was just looking at the other day was the CRM activities. The layout was redesigned in a way that makes the data, to your point that you were talking about earlier, the data is just much more present and much more available for the end user. So you're going to see that across the board. There are some kind of wow moments. There's some new controls with, I think there's thermometers and progress meters and things like that are just kind of new for the environment that just convey the information a lot quicker when you see it. And like I mentioned earlier, that the ARM report redesign, they're not the reports themselves, but the definition of those reports is more optimized as well. When you look at the personalization front, it's just so much easier to deliver those changes and to manage those changes than it was before. It was kind of you always had to wonder what people had done when it comes to reconfiguring their grids or whatever. Did they share that with anybody else? And now it's a lot easier to do. So from a real world perspective, you're going to see those kinds of changes. And then, like I said before, just the general sprinkling of all these things across all the screens is going to improve the end user experience. So.
Yeah, very true. Okay, well, so Evan, along those lines, when we make these changes, whether it's an implementation of this or it's an upgrade that we're doing for our clients, I'm a data-driven decision maker. So I want to see the data that shows me this is worth the effort, right? And so technically, are there any performance benchmarks or metrics that, these business leaders should be looking at as maybe a demonstration of productivity improvements that this is going to bring by changing over to this new modern UI?
Yeah, one of the most basic examples is GIs, right? Right now, if you filter a GI, what it will do is it'll take your filter, it'll send it to the server will go and requery the data, filter down the data, pass it back to the user, and then that pops up on your screen after it does a little refresh, and then bam, you have your new filtered data set. Where now with the modern UI allows it to have those data sets on the client side and able to quickly filter them in real time. So the second you apply the filter, it's now already filtering down the data. And on top of that, the new modern UI allows us to also do kind of like some lazy loading / caching / piecemeal updates. So that way you can, any data that you might need that might not be in the initial data set can start to feed from the server without refreshing the entire screen. And on top of that, other data sets that we can now build that we couldn't build before have some feed capabilities. So that way, you see the first 20, you keep scrolling and it magically pulls up the next 20, and you keep scrolling and there's the next 20 without you even thinking. right? It allows, because the current UI, everything's page based. It requires going to the next page, the next data set, where now we can kind of more dynamically change and update those kinds of things.
So you're saying for impatient users like me, I'm going to get data right away. And then as I keep scrolling, I'm going to keep getting more data and I don't have to wait around for it, right?
Exactly.
I love that.
I just want to add on a little bit to what Evan said. In terms of performance, we also have a pretty rich new set of tracing tools that is coming out with the latest releases that is going to help us better maybe support and identify areas that may take more time than is reasonable, and that we can get in and see better telemetry about what those calls are, and we've got more options on how to fix those kind of things if they occur.
Joe, will we be using those sort of internally for our clients? Is that the thought behind that?
Yeah, we'll be working hand in hand with our clients, in case we get any kind of support cases where that becomes an issue, so that it opens up a little bit of a window for us to do those kind of things.
Yeah, that makes sense. So Robert, on that note then, as we think about the and how we do things the Crestwood way, what are the steps we're taking at Crestwood to help support clients during this whole transition to this modern UI? Are there any custom training sessions, migration tools we're using? What can you step us through to help give expectations?
Yeah, absolutely. What I'm talking to the team about is a reminder that we've been here before, both with a new UI from an Acumatica standpoint, because they have done a refresh in the past, but also we have 25 years working with ERP at Crestwood. We have 10 plus in Acumatica going back to the very infancies of the product, the beta versions, version 1. So there's no panic internally at Crestwood, or there shouldn't be any panic on your side. We do weekly stand-ups, which we call level 10 meetings, because they should be rated at that level 10. And we're talking about headlines all the time, changes in the product. We're talking about issues that we're seeing across our entire customer base. So this has been a conversation and will continue to be a conversation. What's going to come out of it is some best practice guides, because we feel like the best enablement that we can give you for your system is a combination of best practice and then the secret sauce. So we're going to be looking across our customer base and bringing that information to you. In terms of rollout strategy, we have regular upgrades. We're going to be incorporating this decision to move to the modern UI in that upgrade and go towards what we call a non-event go live. And you might be thinking, non-event, that sounds a little odd because it's a huge celebration, but non-event go live to us means that you're not determining how you're going to use the system while it's in production use. We're going through those trainings, we're talking to you about the new UI, and we're testing along the way before this ever rolls out. You have full confidence in the system when you're going to start using it for daily transactions. So through that upgrade, we're going to be talking to you about the modern UI, the new layout, how to use it, and then very importantly, what's the right screen configuration for you? Do we need to hide fields? Do we need to adjust fields? That way you're immediately starting to feel that positive impact of this new interface. So that's how we'll plan the rollout, and we're talking about it all the time. It's exciting.
Yeah, it's definitely worth mentioning that Acumatica has given us this huge buffer time of adoption for the modern UI. So in 25 R2, I believe you can just start adding some screens, not all screens, but strategic screens to the modern UI to kind of get a feel for how they work, how you can work with them, and then you can flip back to them at any time that you want. Now there's some caveats there, of course, but in a sense, it can be that easy. But so like Robert said, before we ever do an upgrade for one of our clients, we normally have a sandbox set up for them that we can actually get in there and show them what things are going to look like with the modern UI. And so even though Acumatica has provided a huge buffer time for us, it might be, I think it's 1.5 years, 2 years, there's going to be a point in time where they're going to switch over completely so they can go full forward with all the changes and all the features that they want to then add across the board. So there's going to be a time where you do need to flip over, but it's going to be a while.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, especially for users that maybe come off of legacy systems like a GP or maybe another solution. The existing version of Acumatica will remain for a little while, but eventually what Joe is saying is it's going to get turned off and you will have to operate on this new modern UI. You've got a little bit of time in between, but definitely make the change. It kind of reminds me of my Outlook new modern version. I had the old Outlook and there's a little toggle button and I can toggle over to the new version, but I didn't like it a year ago. And so I went back because it had errors and bugs and things that I didn't like about it. So I went back to the old version. This year I challenged myself. I was like, okay, let me get into this, try it out. I kind of like a month here and there would do it. And now I'm officially on the new version. So for somebody like me, like a user that, knows where everything is, you're hyper efficient and effective with what you know, it allows you to be able to slowly transition into that new modern user experience. And if you're not on the new Outlook, I suggest you get there. And I can help you with that if needed. I'll write a blog.
Well, and for new customers, the default is going to be the new modern UI. So it's like depending on every situation is different. If you're a new customer, brand new to the system, you can just start out with the brand new UI and go full force with that. If you're trying to migrate, like Joe said and Robert said, we can kind of get you there. Whatever path makes the most sense. So
that makes a lot of sense. Robert, I want to be a skeptic for a second and ask, have you encountered any common maybe pitfalls in early testing or anything that that we're going to be proactively addressing for our clients at Crestwood?
Sure, I'll go back just a little bit. This is not the first time we're interacting with the new UI. We've been working closely with Acumatica to provide feedback in the past 6 or 8 months. We've been pulled in, especially this group intentionally on the development side as well, to look at that new UI. So in terms of common pitfalls, they're doing a fantastic job at addressing them. But what's really clear about this is understanding what this change means, describing it very clearly, and testing in what you might have heard us call the sandbox. And I think it's important to talk about the origins of that word sandbox as well. That's your playground. That's your playground. That's meant so that you can break things, test things rigorously, and get some experience in the system. We have a very close relationship with Acumatica. They're a fantastic support agency for us as well. So if we need to engage them to look at particular issues, we can. But so far, I do have to say it's been very successful. They've done a fantastic job at QC along the way to make sure that we're in a stable place with our customers.
That's good. I think about the different clients that we speak to and the different teams within those businesses we speak to. The experience of a salesperson versus a services person versus an accounting person when it comes to this is going to be so different. And we know accountants out there, we're part of the BDO network. We work with a lot of CPA firms. We know you don't like things to change. That's okay. What we want to do is we want to help you get comfortable with it because it's going to change. But that disruption oftentimes makes people nervous, where the sales team might be like, yeah, turn it on and let's go. The accounting team's like, whoa, we got to make sure everything's correct here first. So with that, and for those clients maybe that might be concerned about the disruption, what's your recommended rollout strategy for them? Should they phase it? What do you think, Robert?
So right now, it's going to be incorporated in that upgrade process. And in terms of rollout within that upgrade, we're going to have some conversations up front that shows you the screens on the classic version and then the modern version. And what you're going to find is Acumatica took an approach that in the past, we had these components. I call them fridge magnets or chalkboard magnets that we would see across the screen. So very familiar with the summary area, the line area that I've talked about. Actions at the top under that little 3-dot or ellipses menu. So it's this familiar screen feel. In the modern UI, we do have more flexibility in how those screens can be arranged, but it was designed intentionally where the switch is going to feel familiar. So just because we can draw anything we want on that chalkboard, it's going to be aligned in the same form, fit, and function to the classic UI. So in terms of rollout, it's going to be engage in an upgrade project, have the discovery conversations, go through some new features that are coming right along with this that we think we can incorporate, and then test, plan. We go through a phase called UAT, user acceptance testing, resolve any issues, and then a cutover to live. You can choose whether to stay on the old classic UI or the modern UI on a screen-by-screen basis if you're not comfortable moving with that initial upgrade. So that's for your entire organization. You'll make a decision on which screen you want to go towards, which we talked about just a little bit ago. And that's going to be part of this process, because it's not only important to define this change very clearly to set some confidence, but also to have a plan in case there is some hesitancy to make sure that we're not putting your business at stake in your ERP. We're going to make sure that this is extremely stable, and we're going to make sure that you're comfortable operating in this system, because it is something that you rely on, and we know that we take that responsibility very seriously.
Yeah, that's great insights, and I'm sure that's going to be a clip of some sort for an upcoming blog that we probably need to create, like the top 10 things you need to do to prepare for this. So no pressure, Robert, but maybe you have a blog coming soon.
Not a problem.
Perfect. Joe, as I think about tips and advice for developers, from experienced developers like you guys, what are some top tips that you have for those developers that might be preparing for customizations, or any best practices for testing compatibility that you want to offer up?
That's a great question, Stephanie. How much time do we have?
You got 4 minutes max.
Yeah. So I guess the first tip would be get in front of it, get ahead of it. Acumatica has those training classes out there. Get certified, and as much as you can, really not just take the classes and take the tests, but do the work. Go through and really try to understand what the layout means and what your options are. In addition to that, we talk a lot in this conversation right now about core or out-of-the-box screens that can be switched back and forth between the modern UI and the classic UI. The same goes for customizations. However, those screens have to be converted, and Acumatica has provided some really great tools to do that conversion. But what's going to happen is it's also going to expose anything that isn't quite 100% kosher, if you know what I mean. If there's a problem in the ASPX that just happens to work just fine in the current UI, it may get translated funny, and that's partly because of the features that are coming out that you need to just start doing those conversions on your own and seeing what happens. Get used to understanding how to fix those, get those documented. Our team goes through a level 10 meeting every week also, and that's one of our headlines, is to talk about what we've experienced in trying to do those conversions. There's one little nuance that folks may not be aware of, but in your current screen, if you have a grid, you'll most likely see like a little pencil icon that allows you to take one line of that grid and view it as a form. And so on our end, we can customize that form to include maybe some different data that doesn't quite look right in the grid. And so we have a lot of that code out in the wild where we allow a user to sort of work with one line at a time and see the big picture. Well, that isn't necessarily supported anymore, but in a good way. It's trying to move all that UI into the grid, and you have more options now of how it's displayed on the grid. So that's just one area that you kind of have to be on the lookout for. Another area is we routinely do a lot of customizations and compiled code that will change where certain user fields might show up on a screen, on a standard screen. Well, when you add that layer of the screen configuration manager now, the user can now start moving things around. So you may end up with like a little bit of a fight between, okay, who's going to take precedence, whose UI is going to display over your own. So you got to kind of think through those type of things too. So again, it's the biggest tip is get ahead of it, start understanding. Just because you may be really good at TypeScript and Aurelia and have that technology or have that have those chops behind you, you need to know how that fits in the Acumatica framework and how all that merges together. So it's important to take those classes and get well trained.
It
Yeah,
also goes back. I'm sorry.
Go ahead,
It
Mike.
also goes back to kind of the early days when I was working with Acumatica and using the framework, learning the framework. One of the things I did all the time, and I still do it some today, but not as much, is looking at their source code, looking at how they did things. And really, I think that's the kind of refresh thing that everybody out there needs to kind of get used to doing again is, hey, how did Acumatica implement these new features and how did they get around? They used to do it this way, now they have to do it this way. Using those examples, I think, is going to be key for everybody, and knowing where to look to find them. You know, there's a new set of files, if you will, behind the screen, behind the scenes, that support the HTML, the TypeScript, etc. And you've got to know where to look for those things and where to find those examples. But that's really kind of one of the key features from my perspective of Acumatica's delivery is they do send you the source code for almost everything that's out there. So we've got a great library of things to look at and compare to and walk through, and that's going to become more and more important for, I think, all the developers out there as we move forward. In addition to the fact that, you know, the documentation that Acumatica is providing now is light years ahead of, you know, 5-10 years ago when they were just starting to get that together. It's really solid now. So I'm excited to kind of keep moving forward with kind of a fresh new set of tools.
Yeah, you know, and for kind of like a side topic here for the audience, you know, we've mentioned level 10 calls almost a few times now, I think, and that's a strategic meeting we have at Crestwood. So we're a 100% virtual team, and to keep a really great communication cadence and synergy as a team, we're having these strategic meetings as teams each week where we're funneling information between the teams and we're strategically approaching our growth as an organization. And I'm saying that because it's not lost on me that as a developer or as a consultant, you have projects to work day to day. And to be able to learn this modern UI and some of the complexities that are going to change with it, that takes time, and your time is allocated elsewhere. And so we have found that these really consistent communication cadences, which we use all the time as a company, this is where we start to fill in more communication about these learnings and how we're going to get the team up to speed. And so if you're a VAR, if you're a developer, a consultant, and you're thinking, you know, how do I get up to speed on this? Maybe you're an end user thinking, how do I get my team up to speed with this? That communication plan works wonders. And, you know, definitely build out a strategic communication plan and have that change agent motion in place for this, and it'll go smoothly. So, you know, Evan, for those end users, what's one quick win that you think they can implement right away, like maybe exploring some beta features? What's your feedback there?
Yeah, the most basic example is the one I kind of already referenced, but we'll do it again. You know, with the, you know, if there's a GI that a couple group of users who are maybe more advanced, more willing to accept changes, use on a consistent basis, turning that GI for them onto the modern UI will be a huge win, because not only will they have the advantages of the quicker refresh and the faster filtering, but they'll also start to see the more complex filtering that they can build and the more dynamic ways they can sort the data that just isn't available right now. So getting users to be able to find the data faster, find the data better, more accurate, and it's going to be a huge win. But another thing is also Acumatica is adding new types of dashboards, new types of screens out there to kind of latch on to some of the existing ones. A basic example is for production. Right now, you can go to a screen, you can stop when you're starting or stopping a time labor activity. But now you have a stopwatch. A stopwatch, in my opinion, is so much more intuitive to know, oh, yeah, the clock is ticking. I am doing this job and I've started it, and now let me stop it, versus a screen that just has a big button that says start or stop. It's not as, you know, user friendly. And on top of that, you know, with the modern UI, you now have these you know, ability to put it on a tablet, ability to put it on a phone. So if you have a stopwatch on your phone, that might make much more sense for your business. So, you know, exploring those new dashboards, those new screens that they're putting out there is also going to be a huge win for some people.
Yeah, that's great feedback. As we kind of wrap up the hour here, we're coming up on the end of our discussion. I was looking at the chat. We don't have anything in there currently. One of the things I want to mention, though, is if you're watching this after this live session, feel free to add in those comments. We would be happy to follow up on those and give some feedback in the thread as you put those in there. We'll also be creating a follow-up with our newsletters at Crestwood. So if you want to get on that list, just message us here on LinkedIn and we'll make that happen for you. What I want to do, though, as this last question as a group, I want to give a bit of advice for whoever's watching this. And so this is the team to do it. We've invested a lot with Acumatica. This team is one that works closely with these changes, and I think there's a lot to offer here. So you guys, if you could give one piece of advice to someone hesitant about this update, what would it be? So Robert, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think what's going to be important is understanding why you're hesitant. We've talked a lot about understanding what this means on the call, but if you're following along with our Coffee with Crestwood series or reading our blogs, you might have heard us talk about sustainable change. And it normally comes down to vision, skills, resources, incentives, or action plans. And the biggest piece of advice that I can give this group if you're hesitant, pick up the phone. We have an entire customer success team at Crestwood that will help you identify what maybe that hesitancy is, and let's solve it together. Let's have a conversation.
Yeah, that's good. Okay. Mike, what about you? What's your feedback?
Well, the bottom line is start reading. There's so many resources out there, whether it's the documentation that's online at help.acumatica.com or some of the things that you can find in the actual documents that are published with the release. Start digesting that information as quickly as you can. And that goes for both the developers and the end users. There's kind of different content for each lane there. And if you can get hands-on and start either using the new features of the application or using the new programming components that are going to be out there for the developers, you're going to be that much further ahead. And the bottom line is the developers are going to naturally gravitate towards these technical aspects, and they need to, because there's certain things now that are different under the hood, like when you're publishing customizations, when you're trying to kind of manifest these new modern UI components into your systems. If you make a mistake or if you do something wrong, you're going to want to know how to fix those, and you have to understand that architecture and able to be enabled to do that. From the client perspective, just understanding what the possibilities are. There's so many tools and so many features out there with it. Getting that knowledge in your head, so that, hey, maybe if I click this, I suddenly have access to write SQL-based queries in my GI rather than these form-based GI queries that we have. So a lot of reading and getting your hands on it early. It's my advice.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Evan, what's your feedback?
Test. I think that's something, at Crestwood we're very repetitive about, but, in general, no matter if it's a small customization change that we're making now or a big module that we're implementing for someone, testing is huge and it's part of any change. And I think this change is no different. Getting in there and testing. And something I always like to suggest is, when you're looking at these different changes, whether it's an upgrade, whether it's a modern UI change, if you have a task that you do day to day that maybe is on the slightly complex side, if you could go into a sandbox environment and redo that exact set of, day-to-day activity with that complexity, see, this is how it works today and this is how it worked tomorrow, kind of an idea, and get that wrapped around, and you can easily, capture any issues or problems, or hopefully be pleasantly surprised by the new efficiency.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so Joe, bring us in. What's your last bit of feedback for everyone?
So for me, I slide all the way the other way and I say, just dive in. I'm a developer at my core, so we're very critical animals. We're very methodical about releasing things. And like I said before, this isn't dangerous. This is something that you can get ahead of and just dive right in.
Yeah, coming from Joe, that's a big deal, because in the organization, he's always the one to raise his hand and say, wait, what are we doing? Slow down, let's think it through. And so the fact that he's jumping in and saying, which by the way, is very beneficial for people like me who like risk, it balances us. So, I think the fact that Joe's saying, hey, get into it is a great thing. So these are conversations we've been having at Crestwood for months, over a year, I know for sure. And, this is stuff that just kind of comes to us naturally now that we've done the learning, we've communicated with the team internally, we're starting to communicate with our clients. So I want to thank you guys for sharing your time, number one, but then also your knowledge today, because I'm hoping that, we've accomplished what we set out for today, which was to educate an audience of maybe, end users or other Acumatica VARs, other team members that could really benefit from the new modern changes coming to Acumatica. And, my spiel for the audience that's watching today, if you don't know what you don't know, reach out. We can help provide resources. Matter of fact, Joe, you mentioned a PDF earlier in this session, and let's get that link and we'll post it into the comments, just in case, somebody wants to dig in a little bit further into the details that you mentioned. But, reach out to us, crestwood.com, or here on LinkedIn. We're happy to answer questions and just connect. The Acumatica community is relatively large, yet small. And so we're happy to do what we can in the space. But thanks everybody for jumping on here. And, any final words from anybody on the team?
Have fun.
Yeah, let's go. All right, well, everyone have a great day.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.